Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be looking at fire dragons and talking about why they are one of the best, if not the best, aspect warrior in the Eldari Codex. So it's been a little bit since my last video. I've been kind of tinkering with a couple things, trying to get streaming to work on the channel. And I finally think I have it working, so let me know in the comment section if you guys would like some, Eldari Q&As, if you guys want to ask me questions live at some point, and I will try to schedule those in. So let me know about that if you're interested or not, but the videos will continue in any case. So, fire dragons. Why are they good? Why do we take them in our armies? So a lot of people are going to answer, we take them in our armies to destroy vehicles. And that is surely part of the reason. Vehicles and monsters are the dragon's specialty. They are the best unit in the game, point for point, at being able to destroy vehicles and monsters. However, they do have a couple of other qualities to them that I would like to talk about. And actually, I don't think actually killing the monsters and the vehicles are the dragon's best quality. And I'll go into why later in this video, but I actually think they are a fantastic board control unit that will not only just win you games because they're good at killing tanks and monsters and stuff like that, but they will also win you games because your opponent will be afraid to move their models into certain positions, and that will give you early game board dominance. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into it and talk about why fire dragons are one of the best units in the codex and also my favorite unit. Okay, so we are going to be looking at their stats, weapons, and special rules, doing a quick overview on that. We're going to be looking at their strengths and weaknesses, combos and synergies, and how to use and position fire dragons effectively on the battlefield. And I will show you how to do that on Tabletop Simulator to get the best and the most out of them. So looking at the basic stats here, fire dragons are essentially your basic fire warrior equivalent, right? Or not fire warrior, excuse me, your aspect warrior equivalent. They have toughness 3, movement 7, 3+ save, 6 up leadership, a 5+ invulnerable save, but, only 1 wound. And they do have a slightly better leadership characteristic than other units in our codex. The ranged weapons they come equipped with are the Dragon Fusion Guns, which are slightly better Melta guns at strength 9. They have AP -4, of course, D6 damage, Assault, and Melta 3. The Assault and Melta 3 are going to be the important things on these guys. It allows them to go faster and to stretch their very short range weapons a little bit longer. So you will find that a lot of times, fire dragons without an advance move or a transport are just not going to be threatening the monsters and the vehicles you want to threaten, or they're just not going to do enough damage to those targets to necessarily kill them. You really do need that Melta 3, and Assault goes hand in hand with that. Now, alternatively, aside from the other weapons, you can arm the Exarch and you take the Dragon Fusion Pistol. However, guys, this is more of a just kind of fun build with the Exarch. It's not necessarily competitive. And the reason for that is very short range. You're rarely going to be within Melta range with this thing. And the melee weapon that you get to take alongside of it is rarely going to be used as well, which, for obvious reasons, we'll go into in just a little bit. The Exarch can be armed with the Dragon's Breath Flamer, which is slightly better than it was before, guys. It is now, instead of just D6, it is D6 plus 2 shots. It is strength 6, AP -2 this time around, so it is a more powerful flamer. Has Torrent, ignores cover, and assault. I want to like this thing because it's kind of cool, right? The Dragon's Breath Flamer has always been like a cool weapon, but it just has no place whatsoever on a primarily anti-large unit. So you're not going to take this thing in most cases. I think there are some fringe cases where you might consider this, like if all of a sudden we found ourselves in a horde meta and those hordes were accompanied by, monsters or vehicles, but they were not as tough, they were very light vehicles, I think there could be an argument for this, but to be honest with you, it's just not worth taking. It's fun, it's cool, but it's not competitive. The Exarch's Dragon Fusion Gun is a competitive choice, but I do think it is still worse than the last option, which we'll go over in just a second. The Exarch's Dragon Fusion Gun has the benefit of Melta 6. In every other way, it is the same as a Dragon Fusion Gun, though. Same strength, same AP, same base damage, D6. Still has Assault, just does 3 extra damage when within half range. Now, I think the main issue with this is that a lot of times, having the extra strength of the other weapon is just going to be better. So, if we look at the Fire Pike is the premier option for the Exarch. The reason for this is the greater strength. Usually, fire dragons are wounding things on 5s, and the Exarch wounds them on 3s. This is a big deal because that means that oftentimes you can preserve the aspect token a little bit longer against certain targets, which open up a lot more options for you in the next turn, right? So when we go over the aspect token, I'll kind of talk about what those options might be. But in essence, the Fire Pike allows you to put more damage into your target overall because of, the averages and how kind of the greater statistic to wound increases the number of shots that you're going to actually get through. So having the extra Melta 3 isn't really that big of a deal because usually you're going to want to just put more shots into your opponent. You're going to want to hit more, wound more, and force more saves, especially against units with invulns and stuff like that. So you're going to want to go with the Fire Pike in most cases, and the extra range is very helpful. It's very useful. You'd be surprised. Okay, let's talk about the melee weapons. They're non-existent, right? The Fire Dragons are not a melee unit. 2 attacks each, 3+ to hit, 3 strength, AP 0, damage 1, garbage. Usually, like most shooting aspect warriors. The Dragon Axe does look good on paper, right? 3 attacks, strength 3, AP -4, damage D6, and strength 6 looks very tasty. The reason why this isn't good, guys, and why this is a trap is ask yourself this. Are you ever going to charge after advancing or getting out of a transport after you move? No, you're not, right? And the ability of the Fire Dragons only works in the shooting phase. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. So you're not re-rolling wounds against vehicles and monsters. This is literally just good against multi-wound models, but it's not even that good against them because even though it has a high AP value, it's D6 damage. It's not a flat 3, so you can't guarantee killing 3-wound models. If you roll that 2 or a 1, you're just going to fail, and you're not going to do that much damage. You're also hitting on 3s. Again, you're not re-rolling. You're hitting on 3s. Against most tougher targets, you're wounding on 3s. You might get 1 or 2 wounds, and they might fail their invul. It's just a lot of ifs, and the Dragon Axe, in my opinion, just comes short of being good. The Fire Pike is definitely the premier option, but it is cool, right? The Dragon Axe is awesome. It looks cool, but I think it's probably just a better piece used on a conversion or something like that, other than on the actual Dragon Exarch. As far as their abilities, the reason why you want to take the Fire Pike is this Assured Destruction ability. In your shooting phase, each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack that targets a monster or vehicle unit, you can reroll the hit roll, wound roll, and damage roll. So this is one of the best abilities for killing monsters and vehicles in the game. Eradicators have it, right? Eradicators from the Space Marine Codex have it, and a lot of people were asking for this, and we finally did get it. This makes Fire Dragons the premier anti-large unit in the game. Makes them very reliable at killing targets, even tough monsters and vehicles that you would need 5s to wound normally. Now, your 33% chance becomes a 55% chance with the reroll. And that's still not that great though, guys, right? A 55% chance of wounding is good, but it's not foolproof. And that's the reason why you want to take the Fire Pike, because 3+ to wound, rerolling is much better odds than 5+ to wound rerolling, even with the extra Melta. So yeah, you definitely want to get within half range with these guys as well, because you want to push as much damage through as possible. right? And of course, they do also have battle focus, being an Eldar unit. Now, they also come with a Shrine token. Now, the Shrine token is not that impactful in other aspect squads. It's pretty good. Like, it's pretty good in Banshees, right? You can feed the Exarch, you know, an extra wound if you miss one. Exarch's Executioner is pretty good in Howling Banshees. Striking Scorpions, you can feed a hit roll to get an extra sustained hit. So that's pretty good, right, with the Biting Blade. Shoot, even Warp Spiders, if you have the melee version, can push through an automatic lethal hit. But with Fire Dragons, I think this really comes into play. This really comes into its own. Because you don't just use it in your own shooting phase. You can use it anytime. So what you can do is, if you're shooting in a tank and you roll good enough to kill it, you can potentially overwatch another vehicle coming in. And that's also why you take the Fire Pike, because 18-inch overwatch with 9 inches at half range, it's much better at doing damage to targets than a Dragon Fusion gun. So for 1 CP, you can potentially pop something light, right? Like if you drop your Fire Dragons next to a Leman Russ battle tank, and within 9 inches there's also a Sentinel that you could possibly pop, well, you can pop the Leman Russ with your shooting, and then, you know, when your opponent moves the Sentinel, either they can't move it, which is also really good if you can prevent an enemy from moving, or they have to move it and risk you giving yourself the Aspect Shrine token, making that hit roll a 6, wounding on a 3+, which is fairly doable. Again, it's not a guarantee, but it's fairly doable. And doing D6 plus 3 damage, which on a 4+, that Sentinel's just going to die, right? So it's not, again, it's not a guarantee, but it gives your opponent something to think about. It's like, do I really want to just lose my Armored Sentinel here? Or should I just sit around and you know, anyway, it gives your opponent pause to think, right? And you want to give your opponent hard choices to make. You want to put your opponent into positions where none of the choices they make are necessarily great. So yeah, Aspect Shrine tokens are super useful on Fire Dragons, and you know, that's why they're taken in squads of 10 sometimes, although I do think that squads of 5 are probably the way to go. Now, as far as their options, again, you can take a Dragon's Breath Flamer with the Exarch, a Dragon Fusion Pistol and Dragon Axe, or a Fire Pike. I'm not sure why the Fire Pike specifically is lowercase, but whatever it is, it is what it is. The Fire Pike is the premier option, right? You definitely want to take the Fire Pike. As for the unit size, it can be taken in squads of 5 or 10. Now, these point values are incorrect, ladies and gentlemen. The app has not updated, at least as far as I can tell on my end. The app has not updated. These guys are now 110 points for 5 and 220 for 10. But they are still extremely good for the cost. 110 points is awesome for these guys. I think they're actually right where they should be at 110 points. I think any more expensive and they'd be kind of luxurious, you know. I think that I'd still take them for 120, but I wouldn't be that happy about it. It's just because they're so critical to the Aeldari game plan right now that you kind of need them in a lot of detachments. But, you know, again, that's just me not wanting Eldar to get nerfed harder, you know, knock on wood. So we'll see about that. But yeah, pretty good points level, and you do want to keep them in small squads for the most part, unless you're running like Seer Council or something like that, and you have a plan with, you know, Fuegan, stuff like that. All right, and the other thing is they have grenades. So they can also chuck a grenade, kill a lone op nearby or something like that, or do extra damage to a vehicle. Again, just a great quality of life keyword to have. All right, next up is Fuegan. We're going to talk about him briefly as well. We're going to roll him into this video because, again, he is going to be a model you're going to usually attach to Fire Dragons. Basic Phoenix Lord profile with a 4+ invul save. He doesn't have any extra, you know, toughness or wounds or anything like that a normal Phoenix Lord doesn't have. As far as his ranged weapons, he has 2 different profiles. We have the Searsong Beam, which is Assault, Melta 1, and Sustained Hits 2. This is really good for killing Marine equivalents, but can trade up if you're really close into Terminators. So this can actually kill 3 wound models if you're close because it has Melta 1. As far as the Lance version, it is a Melta 6 weapon. It's basically a slightly stronger fire pike, hits on 2, strength 14 instead of 12, minus 4 AP, and D6 damage, but it has that big Melta D6. So Fuegan is really good. He's one of the best Phoenix Lords currently. Very strong. I would say that he's probably the 3rd best Phoenix Lord out of the bunch. Again, that's just me, but he is super strong and I use him in a lot of lists. I don't think he's necessary when using Fire Dragons, but he certainly makes Fire Dragons hit so much harder in a couple of different detachments. So, I think, for example, he's really good in detachments that can get sustained hits, because sustained hits with his Searsong Lance firing mode is really good with aspect tokens. Really good. And he's no slouch in melee. He's pretty good in melee, but, I've discovered that he's actually not as good as a lot of people make him out to be in melee. I know he can kill Marines and other, damage 3, wound 3 models. But the strength 5, I think, kind of sucks, because it means that against toughness 6 models, usually things like, heavy intercessors, or, the big heavy intercessor equivalent models, like, I can't remember what the other unit's called, but the three wound guys that, deep strike in your backfield and stuff, interceptors maybe, they're all toughness 6. So if you go in there against them, you have 6 attacks, you're hitting 5 times, and then you may wound twice, and you'll probably kill 2 models. It's probably not as good as something like a Zerman who can wound on 4s. He's killing probably 2 to 3 models. Fuegan's lucky to kill 2. And sometimes he doesn't even do that. So yeah, he's good. His melee's good, but his shooting is really where it's at. You want to prioritize that. He does have the leader ability and battle focus, and he can join fire dragons, of course. His other abilities are the burning lance. And again, this adds 6 to the range characteristic of Melta weapons equipped by models in this unit, including himself. He will get a 24-inch range. The Exarch will get a 24-inch range. And the other fire dragons will get an 18-inch range. That means their Melta range is increased to 9 inches, and the fire pike and himself is increased to 12. This allows them to come out of reserve and kill something, like in Seer Council, when you can teleport with Unshrouded Truth all over the battlefield. A unit of 5 fire dragons and Fuegan in it, or a unit of 10 fire dragons with Fuegan in it, can teleport, kill something, and then, basically just get angles that your opponent didn't expect. Unquenchable Resolve means that once the unit is destroyed, including himself, on a 2-up, he gets back up, which is great, right? It's a great ability. Honestly, he doesn't have Feel No Pain anymore, so it's not as good as it used to be, but it is still very strong. Anytime you have a model that can literally just get up after dying and still be of value to you on the battlefield is a fantastic model, whatever that is, right? The Dark Eldar, they have Urian. You spend 80 points for him. He's nowhere near as powerful as Fuegan, but just because of the fact that he can get up on a 2+ means he has a place in competitive lists, even though he never works for me. And of course, he can lead fire dragons, and he comes in at 120 points. I think this is, again, kind of a perfect point level for him. Some people would argue that he should be cheaper, but I think for what he brings to the table, he's definitely worth 120 points because he gets back from the dead, right? I think getting back from the dead on a 2-up, that's going to put you at least a minimum of 120 points with the rest of the stuff that this guy brings to the table. And of course, he also has grenades. So a lot of people don't realize this, but he has grenades. Not every Phoenix Lord has grenades, guys. And the fact that he has grenades, just like his fellow Aspect Warriors, is really powerful, because that means that once he dies and he gets back up on a 2-up, he can still use the grenade stratagem on top of his regular shooting. All right, let's talk about the Fire Dragon's strengths and weaknesses, and to a lesser degree, Fuegan's strengths and weaknesses as well. So their strengths are they have immense damage against vehicles and monsters. I think that's the primary thing that sticks out to people when they read their data sheet. High strength and AP of their weapons as well means that they can do really good work into some heavier multi-wound models. They can kill a couple custodies, right? Like if you're going into an army that doesn't have a lot of vehicles but has high value infantry, they can still be useful, which is great. So really, fire dragons are useful in most matchups except the matchups that you're going against hordes and hordes of infantry. They might not be good against recon guard, for example, who are running a bunch of infantry, or, swarm tyranids who are running just a bunch of gargoyles and termagants. They're probably not going to be good against those types of armies, but against pretty much any other matchup, they're really good. They have the grenades keyword, which is a huge strength. Any unit that has grenades is good. And especially on a unit like this, who already wants to be close to enemy units, who is already going to be doing, damage into high value targets, grenades is super good. However, they are and do have their weaknesses in some areas, right? So they are fragile. 3+ save and toughness 3 puts them at Sisters of Battle toughness. So they're just like a unit of 5 battle sisters. They're really fragile. They're also really expensive, right? A unit of 5 is going to cost you 110 points. That is almost the most expensive aspect warrior in the book, right? Shining Spears and Crimson Hunter are above them, but we don't really count them because they're not infantry, right? And actually, Shining Spears are more durable than these guys as far as their wounds go. They have more wounds than fire dragons, and they also have more toughness, so they are a little bit more durable than these guys. So these guys are probably the most fragile for the points aspect warriors in the book. I don't know the exact math on it, but that's where my thinking goes, at least. And because they're very short ranged, they almost always need battle focus and an advanced roll to get into position. So sometimes you're going to have to forego that overwatch. So that's another kind of weakness that they have, right? They have a weakness to overwatch. You have to have really good positioning with these guys to be able to put that battle focus token on them, forego the extra 2 inches or 3 inches in Warhost that you would get for the fire dragons, and make sure that they don't get overwatched. So that's something you have to look out for as well with these models. As far as their combos and synergies go, Fuegan is probably the biggest damage multiplier just because of the fact that he can boost their range by 6 inches and gives them another strength 14, big dick damage shot. Basically another fire pike, but better. Eldorad's Doom gives them +1 to wound against their target. Again, I take Eldorad in a lot of my lists. Doom has wildly increased the damage of fire dragons against tough targets moving into the midfield. So a lot of opponents will bank on their 4-up invul saves and command reroll, being able to survive a dragon attack. But having Doom thrown in there as well means that usually you're going to hit and wound close to all the fire dragon's attacks. You're probably going to get 4 or 5 against your opponent. And even if 2 go through against a tough monster, that's going to be 2d6 plus 6 damage, which is a lot. So that's 13 wounds minimum. You throw a grenade in there, that all of a sudden becomes 16 wounds. There's not a lot of 4+ invulnerable units in the game that can survive that, except for like greater demons. So you're talking about things like great unclean ones and stuff like that. Yeah, they can possibly survive. I think Bellicor might be able to survive with 18 wounds, but for 110 points, you're almost one-shotting a big greater demon. That's pretty insane. As far as the other synergies from detachments, we have the Aspect Host's Warrior's Focus stratagem, which allows them to ignore hit, strength, AP, and damage modifiers. So your opponent's not going to be able to AOC. They're not going to be able to do any -1 damage. It's not like Imperial Guard that can just Rogel Dorn your, damage to 0 and stuff like that. They're just not going to be able to do it in Aspect Host, which means fire dragons are going to be really hard hitting. War Host and Aspect Host can also give them sustained hits through their stratagems. So in War Host, blitzing firepower, they're always going to be pretty much within 12 of their target, which means that you're always going to be able to benefit from blitzing firepower, getting that sustained hits. which means you can double the amount of attacks on average that they're going to get by just flipping a dice to a 6. So you roll normally, right, guys? You roll normally, you're hitting on 3s, you get 5 dice. Chances are you're going to get 1 6, and then you flip another one to a 6, and that's going to give you 2 additional attacks, right? So that's pretty awesome. And of course, they're also re-rolling all their wounds and damage rolls as well, which is another thing, I didn't mention, is that if you roll highs and lows with fire dragons, like if you roll your 2d6 damage that went through your target and you get a 1 and a 6, which is a common roll, then you can always re-roll the 1. Or if you get a 5 and a 2, you can re-roll the 2. Chances are you're going to get a 3 or more anyway, right? So you can always increase your damage like that. Warhost also gives them extra movement. So being able to move an extra inch with your battle focus move is really good. And then Aspect Host gives them rerolls 1 to hit and wound, although that only matters against non-vehicle and monster targets. So if you're going against Custodes, for example, being able to all of a sudden reroll 1s to hit against them is actually pretty decent, because Custodes can be very tough, right? If you don't have the right tools to deal with Custodes units, and your opponent's just rolling 2-up saves and rolling 4-up invulns all game, it's going to be kind of hard for you. So being able to get more dice into them is always a good thing. Alrighty, guys. So now we're going to dive into Tabletop Simulator, and I'm going to show you guys how to use fire dragons on the tabletop and how to control the board with them. Alrighty, welcome to our Tabletop Simulator example for our fire dragons. So here are the fire dragons, and we're going to kind of show you guys how to set up your fire dragons for maximum deterrence effect, right? So our opponent is your classic Space Marine build. Now, I put a lot of different vehicles on the field. Maybe your opponent doesn't run this many vehicles, but it's just purely an example to show you guys. I doubt an opponent would, well, I mean, I guess they could run this many vehicles in certain lists. But I'm just going to show you guys basically how to counter each one of your opponent's vehicle types. Okay, so there's a couple different types of vehicles that you're going to commonly come across in your games. There are your transport vehicles, and those vehicles are going to be the first wave vehicles. They're going to come up, disembark troops, control objectives, move block, tank shock, all that good stuff. Then you have your combat vehicles, typically things like Brutalis Dreadnoughts, sometimes Redemptors, but usually not. You either have a Brutalis or a Bastillus or something like that that's either going to provide some shooting for you or combat or a mix of both. Then you're going to have your long-range shooting vehicles, things like Gladiator Lancers, Exterminators, stuff like that, right? In this case, it's a Lancer, but could easily just be an Exterminator instead. Now, your opponent is going to try to also do the same thing you're doing, right? So you're using the fire dragons to control the firing lanes, and your opponent can easily do the same thing with their models, right? Gladiator Lancer, with Oath of Moment, is a very dangerous vehicle. Gladiator Exterminator, very dangerous vehicle at killing infantry and larger targets as well, especially with Oath of Moment. So you have to watch out for these. These are really powerful tools at your opponent's disposal. So with our fire dragons, there's going to be other elements to this, right? So I think the biggest thing of advice I can give players is your first wave vehicles, your Rhinos, your Razorbacks, your Drukhari Raiders, your, opponents' Venoms, whatever transports they're using are not the priority for fire dragons, right? Now, if you have to score an objective, if you absolutely have to kill the Venom to be able to get at the squad inside and maybe score a secondary like Assassinate or something like that, then you can use your fire dragons for that. Absolutely. They are a tool that can be used in many different ways. But typically speaking, if you don't have something like that, you do not want to waste a unit of fire dragons killing a Rhino under perfect circumstances. All right, so let's start with that. How do you counter the Rhino, quote unquote, the Rhino rush, right? Well, now the Rhinos should really not even be touched by fire dragons, and they should be a unit that is move blocked. So when I'm talking about move blocking, I'm talking about doing this to a unit, right? Let's say I have some striking scorpions here, right? my striking scorpions are going to be the ones to do this. So maybe I deploy them right here, around here, right, for infiltration. If I go first turn, I'm going to scout them up, and then I'm going to move into contact with the wall. I'm going to spread my guys out. And I'm going to prevent those models from being able to move. I might even move the scorpions a little bit more like this in case they have some vehicles over here as well. So I'm not going to spread them out too much. But something like this, you know, if a vehicle wants to move over here, can't do it because you're in engagement range, right? Also, this prevents the Rhino from being able to do whatever it wants to do. So yes, they can disembark the Space Marines from it, but the Space Marines, if they disembark over here, they're not truly going to be able to probably get to the objective and also shoot at whatever I deployed back here, right? They're just not going to have the movement. A key strategy that I find a lot of Marine players do is they use the Rhino to edge up against the wall. The Rhino is nice and square, so it's very easy to do this. And then what they'll do is they'll just simply disembark the Space Marines from the wall, right? They'll go 3 inches. They'll disembark them somewhere over here. They will move their 6 inches onto the objective, somewhere like that, and then they'll go maybe sometimes even for an advance roll to try to tow this line right here, to tow this terrain, so that they can shoot at whatever's behind this. So not only do they control the objective, but they can also shoot at anything behind here. And, you know, if you're a squishy Eldar player, that's not good. So you want to use your Scorpions here to prevent that movement from happening. So that's not something your Fire Dragon should worry about. Your Fire Dragon should worry about things like the Redemptor, the Lancer, and other types of vehicles like that. So in this case, you'll notice we have our Fire Dragons back here. When we're deploying, if we have our Scorpions and we have the pleasure of going first, this is an easy move. However, if we don't go first, it's going to be a little bit trickier, but we can still put our Scorpions right here and prevent our opponent from advancing onto the terrain piece. So what that means is that we can safely deploy our Fire Dragons here instead. So using synergies between our Aspect Warriors is really important. And that's one of the big things you want to make sure you do when you're setting up your Fire Dragons like this. If your opponent has something deployed that can kill them turn 1, block them out, block the unit that can kill them so you can get a better position. Now you will have the advantage. So that means that if your opponent decides to move this Lancer in the next turn, maybe there's a target down range, like maybe you have a unit of Rangers right here, maybe not Rangers, but you know, you have something more, a little more substantial in the middle that this Lancer or Executioner or whatever it might be can kill. If it moves out here, right? I think these are speed 10. I'm not sure exactly, but if it moves down here, which is the optimal angle, right? Because it wants to be able to shoot down here and down here, then your Fire Dragons can potentially kill it, right? So just to show you guys real quick, 7-inch movement. Whoops. It's not going to let me do the 7 like that, but let's just say we use our Battle Focus token to 9, and then an advance roll. Let's say we get 4 on that. Will put us within range of this big beast. Now, we won't be in Melta range. Keep that in mind as well, and that means that these Fire Dragons may not be able to fully kill it. Same thing with this squad, right? If we have a squad behind here, again, same thing. The reason we positioned this here was to cover this little spot here. If we move up our 9 inches, whoops, I always hate how this works, but if we move up our 9 inches and then advance, maybe we get like a 3. We're in range, but we're not within Melta range, right? So that is something you're going to have to look out for. Now, luckily, the Lancer's only, you know, it's toughness 10. It has a decent number of wounds, but it only has a 3-up save, right? It's not super tough. It has Armor of Contempt, but 5 Fire Dragons, rerolling hits, rerolling wounds, rerolling damage, plus the Exarch, plus the Aspect token, should be able to bring it down. This thing does not have an invulnerable save, So even if you're not within Melta range, chances are you can still probably kill it. It's not that many wounds, right? This is not a land raider. This is not something with damage modifiers tacked on. So this is a target that you can realistically kill. So if your opponent has a target in the midfield and they move the Lancer out here to kill it, your opponent now has to ask themselves, is it worth losing the Lancer to kill whatever's here, right? And sometimes it's just not going to be worth it, especially when going against Eldar. Like, for example, if we have a Wraith Lord here behind some terrain, right? And the Lancer moves out here. Well, first of all, in this deployment zone, the Wraith Lord would have to be over here to be seen, right? So the Lancer would have to move considerably farther. But let's just assume, just to be a devil's advocate, if it was over here behind this little piece of terrain. And our opponent moves out here, gets line of sight to it, and tries to shoot it. Well, the Wraith Lord's only 140 points. So yeah, your opponent has to kill it, but then they're making a bad trade doing so, because what you're going to do is your Fire Dragons are going to move forward and kill the Lancer in retaliation. So you're setting yourself up for success by kind of understanding how trading works, first of all, but also how your threat ranges work. Now, realistically, is your opponent going to want to do that? Is that ideal for your opponent to do? Absolutely not. That's not a good trade for your opponent, right? So that's why we're using Fire Dragons. It's not because, yeah, and plus, that's a great trade for Fire Dragons. Think about it. They're 110, this is 160. Okay, let me give you another example real quick. So that's one example. So your opponent has to do something about those Fire Dragons, has to put something to Overwatch, has to, commit several units to killing the Wraith Lord, or just has to go after the Wraith Lord another way, right? Has to charge it with something or something similar. Maybe you have Rangers here. Well, if Rangers are hidden behind this little thing, what can attack them but something just head on? And basically everything in the Space Marine Codex is more expensive than Rangers, right? Alternatively, we might have this area move blocked by warp spiders. So the only thing that can actually move in here is something that has some good long range shooting, like a Lancer or an Executioner. So maybe your opponent's only option is to use the Lancer to kill the Rangers. If they don't kill the Rangers, you will score the objective, right? So you're giving your opponent no good options. Again, this is a common theme in my video and many other people's videos on YouTube. Anybody who talks about, competitive Warhammer whatsoever is put your opponent in a position where no matter what they do, you're getting something good out of it, right? Maybe I don't score on this objective, but I'm going to take your Lancer. Okay. So over here on the right side, again, with this Redemptor example, we'll just talk about that real quick. What can the Redemptor do? Well, the Redemptor, in this case, can charge the Scorpions and kill them, right? So what happens if you charge the Scorpions with the Redemptor? Well, the Redemptor or Brutalis or whatever it is, go in here, can kill these Scorpions, right? Boom. Scorpions die, which usually happens when a Redemptor comes in, right? But it can't consolidate onto the objective, right? So it can't get on the objective. And then next turn, now if you're Yunari, if they shot something to death, you could of course move 7, then move, then it's a real easy kill. But in this case, right, you're just going to move up your, let's toggle the measurement with these guys. I don't know why it always turns off randomly, but there you go. We move our 9 inches up. You do have to watch out for flamers, so that might be just a 7-inch move, right? But we could also advance. Let's assume we advance 3. Let's just go 10 inches and see where it gets. Now, first of all, we're on the objective. We're close enough to where, if somebody shot us and didn't kill us completely, we could probably just hide behind here with fade back. That's always something you want to also think of as an Eldar player is, okay, if they do shoot me and they kill like 3 or 4 models, can my Exarch hide with, fade back? And usually you should, yeah. On a 2+, I'm safe, right, to get back behind here. So we measure our distance. We're in range. The Exarch isn't quite in range, but that's okay, right? We're safe from Overwatch, and we can shoot this thing. And if it's a Brutalis, if it's something without -1 damage, we can definitely kill it. If it does have -1 damage, it's going to be a little harder, but we should still be able to do some serious damage to it with the Aspect Token. Again, Dreadnoughts are not that tough. I think they're, these ones are like toughness 9, toughness 10, so, killing this thing isn't that difficult. Even with, Armor of Contempt and things like that, we shouldn't have that much of an issue killing it unless they roll really lucky. Okay, so what about on this side of the battlefield? So this is the other position people like to put Lancers in, or Gladiator Exterminators. They like to put them either behind this ruin so they can come over here like this and come over here. And basically what this will do is this will allow them to shoot this way, right? Anything over here. It'll allow them to shoot anything over here and even up to here, right? So it gives them a lot of options for shooting. And that's why we have a unit of Fire Dragons right here. Now, there's a couple things you can do during deployment with these Fire Dragons. I initially put them here because if your opponent has something very quick that can easily dispatch these Fire Dragons on the side of the battlefield, you might be out of luck, right? So if your opponent has an Exterminator right here, I've often seen players, Space Marine players, just move up, right? They move their 10. Or excuse me, they're not right here, they're right here, right? If we deploy them right here, there's a bit of a risk, right? At least on the Dawn of War deployment, there's a little bit of a risk. Because our opponent, cleverly, can draw line of sight from here, and look at that. They have line of sight on the Fire Dragons. So this means the Fire Dragons guys are dead, right? If we put them right here. A good opponent, even if they have an Exterminator, maybe that's not a good trade. But if there's no other Fire Dragons in the area, your Fire Dragons are over here and over here, guess what? You are not in range to shoot it and kill it, right? Like, you may be able to get the Exarch in there maybe, but the rest of the Fire Dragons, you're moving an average of, what, 10 inches? Maybe 12? Do we have 12 inches? No, we don't, right? We'd have to get incredibly lucky with a huge advance roll, and then we'd have to probably be in Warhost with a +1 to your movement to get there. So it's just not going to happen. So your opponent has ruined your ability to retaliate, and then this Lancer gets multiple turns of activation, right? So you would have to have something else to be able to take out this Lancer at this point in the game. It's not impossible, don't get me wrong. We have a lot of unit diversity, like, it can happen, it's possible, but it's just not likely, right? Like, we could use Dark Reapers to kill it, but are Dark Reapers likely going to kill it when they're hitting on 3s, wounding on 4s with 10 shots? Maybe, if we roll good. Maybe not. I would always assume that you're not going to roll above average, so you're probably not going to kill it, right? Especially if it has Armor of Contempt, right? So it's just not likely unless you're doing Aspect Host where Armor of Contempt doesn't matter. And, Aspect Host is good, but there's some weaknesses to it. So the smarter thing to do if your opponent has a tank right here, or really any unit that can move at least 10 or 8 inches, is just deploy them back here. Because what that's going to do is that's going to prevent our opponent from wanting to move forward, right? If our opponent moves forward, even just to here, guys, even if they're hiding it behind this wall, our Fire Dragons can just walk up and kill it. No problem. They could just literally walk up and kill it. So when you're deploying your Fire Dragons, my advice is always keep them in a position where they can cover the firing lanes, right? Gladiator Lancers love to come here, they love to come here, and they love to come over here. These are the 3 spots, right, on this terrain layout. And it might be different in different terrain layouts, but basically there is always going to be just a big thing, at least in GW terrain, where there's going to be a big, like, across the board line of sight option that also intersects an objective. those are where those tanks are going to want to go. They're not going to really go anywhere else, right? These big shooty tanks. Same thing with things like fire prisms. Back in the day, where were fire prisms going to go? Well, fire prisms are fast, but realistically, there's only a few spots that they can realistically, deploy and then want to sit around and stay until the later stages of the game, right? Which was, at least, back in the index when I was running fire prisms, I always put one right here, I always put one right here, and I always put one right here. Why? Because these are all the firing lanes, right? Those are the best firing lanes. So, of course, if your opponent has something like exterminators or lancers, they're going to go in those kind of positions, and they're going to stage early on in the game, maybe to try to get into better positions like here. But if you can set up your fire dragons in a way to prevent them from wanting to do this in the first place, then you got them right where you want them, right? So you can prevent your opponent from doing aggressive moves like this by just moving your fire dragons into a better position. Now, you can further boost this and bolster this by having units like striking scorpions and warp spiders blocking the movements of these vehicles and of their infantry units, and do what I call clogging the gaps. So if you clog the gaps, if you make sure that your opponent can't move out of their deployment zone very easily, then you can prevent your opponent from doing a lot more stuff. And remember earlier how I said the threat range of the fire dragons was probably not going to get you within Melta range? Well, if you're able to use your aspect warriors correctly, you can actually move up a little bit. So, for example, these fire dragons who, by the way, if they were right here, easy line of sight, right? However, if you're allowed to get a turn of movement, they become much harder to target, because now we can move them right up against a wall and, whoops, that's not right. We'll definitely get our unit killed there. They're now much easier to position so that your opponent is not going to be able to easily get them, right? So now the angle is much harder for your opponent to get. Now, hopefully that makes sense. Now, same thing over here, right? Your fire dragons can be right here if your opponent is blocked in. If you block them in with scorpions, if we move these guys back to where they originally were, oops, yeah, something like this, right? Move them up, advance them, whatever, so your opponent can't move past. Your fire dragons can safely go right here, which gives them a much better angle on this lancer. So watch what happens now. Now if the lancer goes over here, it's 8 inches to, get its line of sight or whatever. Our fire dragons have a freebie. We're definitely going to kill this thing now. It's not even just a good chance, it's a guarantee, right? We move up our, on average 10 inches with our advance, and we're going to have a much better chance of killing this lancer right here, right? Now it's a little farther, but at least we have the X-Arc within Melta, right? Which is possible. And then we have a grenade on it as well. I talked earlier in the video how these guys have grenades. You chuck a grenade, you shoot it, it should die. Pretty much guaranteed. And that's the best way to use fire dragons, right? Use them to put pressure on your opponent. Deploy them in kind of places that your opponent is going to move their vehicles. Like, it's very obvious with vehicles like this. A little harder with, certain vehicles that can just move through walls. Okay, that's another thing that we should talk about really quick. What if my opponent has an ability to move through walls? How do I counter that? Well, on certain deployments, it's a little harder. But for example, on this deployment, your Rhino, I have a stratagem where I can move my Chimera because I'm Hammer of the Emperor, an Imperial Guard. I'm going to move my Chimera through a wall. And I can be in engagement range when I do that. Totally fine. We just have to kind of move our guys a little bit different, right? We have to just move right here, right? You can move your Chimera, my friend, my Monkai friend, but you're not going to be able to really get the most out of it, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my guys kind of like this. And yeah, you can move through a wall and engagement range, but you're still just going sideways. You're wasting a lot of movement here. You're probably going to have to pivot, and then you're going to pivot, and you're going to move around this way, right? So your guys get dropped out, your Imperial Guardsmen get dropped out. They're still not on the objective. They're still not on this little lip of terrain. They still can't shoot at your fire dragons. So that Leman Russ battle tank that wants to move forward over here is still threatened by your fire dragons, right? And then, you know, your warp spiders or your striking scorpions are still right here, so they're chilling. If your opponent tries to shoot them with something, you could duck back behind cover with the remaining two, right? Where's the Exarch? There he is. Duck back behind cover. And now your opponent's Leman Russ battle tank maybe can't see it, right? If you roll good enough on your fade back. And what's your opponent going to do at that point? They just have a striking scorpion Exarch back here that they have to deal with now. So those are the kind of synergies that you want to look for. Fire dragons, if you just look at fire dragons themselves, they're a great target elimination. Absolutely. But they're super short range, which means you have to use other units to leverage them to be in a better position, right? A lot of people will also take them in transports. This is another thing that you can do. It does add to their threat range. And I'll give you an example of this. Let's go ahead and we'll just spawn in a quick wave serpent, right? Hopefully it doesn't just totally bug out and freeze, but here is one of my older aspect host lists. We have a wave serpent right here. We can put a wave serpent right here, guys, behind our ruin, safe from enemy shooting. Put it right here. The fins count, by the way. So normally this would be a disadvantage, but we're crafty Eldar players. We're going to use this to our advantage. So we're going to have the fins, and we are going to deploy from the fins. Remember, if they count as part of the whole, which a lot of people say they do, and of course they do, but that goes both ways. That means we can also move our models from the tips of the fins. So we can move out 3 inches from the tip. That sounds so wrong, but there we go. We can move out 3 inches from the tip here. Boom. We can move our normal 7. Boom. And then we could advance, whatever that is. Maybe we get a 3 or a 4. Boom. And then we can shoot this thing, right? So that does kind of help us a little bit because we get that extra 3 inches. It's not mandatory, and personally, my opinion on wave serpents now is that you're probably just going to want to use them. And I know this is going to be a little bit, maybe it's an L take, I don't know, but in my experience, I don't think it's mandatory to take wave serpents unless you're running something like Dark Reapers. And in certain detachments, you don't even want to do that. And the reason for that is because wave serpents are usually, even though they have that little durability boost, they're still kind of fragile. You don't really want to move them into the midboard that much. And units like Dark Reapers are much better suited to using a wave serpent because you can kind of treat Dark Reapers as a gladiator exterminator, right? So if you have 10 Reapers in the wave serpent, it's kind of like a more expensive gladiator exterminator, except you have 2 units instead of just 1, right? I'm going to do a Dark Reaper video soon, so I'm going to save what I say for Dark Reapers for that video. I'm not going to go into it now, but, you know, wave serpents are really good at just kind of controlling the battlefield, going from, you know, left to right, pinning down firing lanes, and destroying stuff at long range. Just in case your fire dragons do not have a way to kill your opponent's lighter targets, right? Like, Dark Reapers are really good at killing rhinos. They're really good at killing rhinos. Why is it okay for a unit of Dark Reapers to kill a rhino? Well, it's not okay for a Fire Dragon unit to kill a rhino, because the Dark Reapers are going to be safe after. And you're going to get multiple activations with Dark Reapers, and you won't get multiple activations with Fire Dragons, right? So that's why you want to move block rhinos if you don't have Dark Reapers. Okay, so yeah, I hope that kind of helps you understand Fire Dragons a little bit. Now, I do want to go into something else before we end our tabletop simulator example, and that is rapid ingress. What is it? When should you do it? And should you do it at all, right? There's a lot of debate about this. So with fire dragons, I think it's a pretty good idea to rapid ingress, but there's some things you should take note of. Number one is that fire dragons are a very short range unit, so you have to position them properly, and they don't have deep strike. So unless you're running them in a falcon, they're not going to be able to just rapid ingress wherever. So when you are deploying, you want to make sure that you can rapid ingress them in a spot where they're safe. So this deployment is really good, but as we can see, look at that, guys. 6 inches is going to get us right here. And can we deploy a squad of 5 fire dragons in this little spot without getting shot at by something over here? Perhaps we could if our opponent didn't see it coming. Maybe we can, right? So in this case, we probably could get away with it if our opponent's here. If our opponent is a little bit farther out, like right here, we probably can't get away with it, right? So there's things you have to think about with rapid ingress. You could rapid ingress back here because it's still a table edge, right? You could just come home from your back. I believe there's no restriction for doing this. You could just come back here. But again, if you're here, what was the point of rapid ingressing? They could have just easily been right there anyway, right? They could have been behind here the whole time in the first place, right? So that doesn't really do a whole lot for us. Really, rapid ingress is the most effective when it's later in the game and your opponent has already played their hand as to where they're going to move. If you're trying to get after these to be completely honest, no offense to Space Marine players, Gladiator, Lancers, and Exterminators, their positioning is very obvious, and you pretty much know exactly what they're going to do from the beginning of the game, which is fine, right? There's units that you know exactly what they're going to do. Like, most opponents know exactly what Dark Reapers in a, Wave Serpent are going to do. It's not hard to figure out. So same thing with the rapid ingress. If there's a Lancer here, rapid ingress here, you might as well just deploy him here. Unless your opponent has some sort of like really fast moving assault unit, in which case you do. So when should you rapid ingress? When you think that your fire dragons might be vulnerable to being destroyed, basically, early on in the game, like turns 1 and maybe turns 2 if you're afraid of that. Now, the advantage to rapid ingress is that you could always leave them into turn 3, right? So if your opponent leaves a spot open back here, you can, of course, come back here and rapid ingress, right? Like in this case, boom. If your opponent, okay, so let's say the Lancer's like, I don't know, maybe the Lancer's like up here at this point. I don't know if you'd want to do that or if anybody would do that, but, sometimes that's the case, right? You have to do an objective or something. You have nothing better to do. Boom, whatever. Right? And you're able to like rapid ingress between like this Redemptor Dreadnought or whatever. Maybe this it's a Brutalis. It's right here, and the Rhino's right here. It's not going to be able to shoot you, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to go over here, rapid ingress right here, and get it to where the Brutalis can't see. I don't know, something like that, right? Well, I don't think that's not a good example. But if there was an open spot back here, you could rapid ingress and there was no chance your opponent was going to be able to charge you effectively, then you could do that. There's the option to do that, right? Or if your opponent didn't have these models, right? Maybe your opponent doesn't have these, has a vehicle here, and you just go like right here. I'm going to rapid ingress right here on turn 3. Pretty good idea, right? Because your opponent can't do anything about it, and then next turn you could just walk forward and kill it. So there are some advantages to rapid ingress. You just have to understand that it's not always going to be a good idea if you're facing a really good opponent who is aware of your rapid ingress and plans for it. Personally, my opinion of rapid ingress is if you have 3 units of dragons, you should put 1 in reserve because that kind of puts your opponent on their toes a little bit. If you only have 1 unit of dragons, there is absolutely 0 point in rapid ingressing it. 0 point. If you have 2 units of dragons, I would also advise maybe not to rapid ingress unless you just have no room to deploy on the battlefield. I think it's a good idea to control the battlefield by putting maybe a dragon unit somewhere over here on this side of the battlefield, either here or here, and putting a dragon unit on the other side of the battlefield, right? If your opponent has something that is a large target that is going to go to the middle, then you still should be in a position with fire dragons to kind of, from this position right here, still move up to the middle and deal with it, right? Because Eldar are fast. We have a lot of things that increase our speed, like advanced rolls and battle focus tokens and stuff like that. Sometimes we have transports. So, we don't really lack ways of getting around the battlefield. Rapid ingress, probably something you should use on a third dragon unit if you are taking 3 dragons. Personally, in my Warhost list, I take 3 dragons. I don't know if the third dragon is entirely necessary, but if you are running, into a very heavy, anti-large meta where there's a lot of tanks, there's a lot of monsters, and, you run into Shadow Legion a lot, or, you run into, I don't know what the other, Plague Legion or whatever they're called. I don't know what the Nurgle detachment's called, but whatever it is. Or you just run into Space Marines with a bunch of vehicles a lot. Yeah, 3 dragons is probably a good idea. You don't need 3 dragons, but, having that a little bit of redundancy in your list can do wonders for you if you just put one of those units in rapid ingress. Okay, that's all I got. I will continue talking about other aspect wars in future videos, but for now, we're going to finish up with fire dragons, and we're going to go back to the video. Alrighty, so we're back, and in conclusion, fire dragons are easily our best answer to a lot of the toughest units in the game, being able to deliver hot, sticky death to any large target in range. However, they are pretty expensive points-wise, and I often find that their best use is in keeping your opponent's biggest threats in check. Again, using their bubble of control, their threat range essentially, to dare opponents to move forward. Yes, you can kill my rangers, but if you move there, my fire dragons are going to move forward and kill you. Or if you try to take this objective and block me with one of your big monsters, then I'm going to throw fire dragons in your face and burn it off, right? So using your fire dragons in that way is what I find to be the best way to use them personally. You don't want to just try to throw fire dragons as quickly downfield as possible and try to shoot your opponent if you're not going to be in Melta range, right? I think this is the biggest trap for a lot of players is they'll see a hard target downfield, they'll say, hey, I'm going to do as much damage as quickly as possible. They'll throw their unit of fire dragons downfield. Maybe they'll have them in range, but they won't be in Melta range, and they maybe do 8 damage to the target, 9 damage to the target, and it has, 3 or 4 wounds left, and then what happens afterward? Well, what happens afterward is that model's still alive, right? It's going to come out and shoot something later on. It's still going to have value for your opponent, and your fire dragons are surely dead, right? So your fire dragons are not really going to be able to really do anything in that case. You definitely don't want to use them like that. Only use them if you have the Melta range. I think that's the primary takeaway from this is that, they're better as a control unit in most cases. From what I found, a threat to your opponent, like, hey, if you move this here, it'll die, then they are an aggressive unit that pushes up the battlefield as fast as possible and kills things as quickly as possible. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters for supporting the channel over the last 2 years. If you do want to support the channel, I do have a channel Discord that you can join. You just have to join Patreon on a free trial. I know that some people are annoyed with how that works, and I know sometimes the links are broken, but just send me a message. You can email me and say, hey, can I get a link to the Discord? I just joined your Patreon, and I'll be able to see that through my end. The reason why I do it that way is because I don't want trolls or bots or any other, malcontents to enter the Discord. It is a private Discord, and I want to keep it that way. There's a lot of riffraff out there. There's a lot of Monkai trash out there, as you guys know, because we are the superior Aeldari, and we want to keep them out, right? So that's why I do it. I know it's a little bit annoying, but you can always sign up for a free Patreon trial. It doesn't cost you any money, and you can get access to the Discord. I also have a channel store page and an Amazon affiliate link for you guys to check out. I think Amazon recently got some more orders of, things like fire dragons and warp spiders, so check that out. Maybe it's gone already, I don't know. But check it out if you want to get a discount, and also if you want to help the channel a little bit. And the store page has some cool Eldari inspired apparel for you guys, some hats, beanies, sweatshirts, t-shirts, all sorts of stuff, cups, mugs. So check that out as well if you guys are so inclined. All right, guys, have a good one. Peace out, and I'll see you guys next time.